She was 19 years old, and, in the quiet, administrative way these things often happen, she was homeless. She had no family left to claim, no money to speak of, and no plan beyond the next sunrise. All she carried was a small, brass-cased compass her father had made, and the $87 her uncle had pressed into her hand as a final severance. And with that $87, she walked into the Territorial Land Office and bought a worthless patch of sun-scorched earth in the Sonora Flats, a place attached to a rusted rail line everyone said led nowhere. But what nobody knew, what the smirking clerk and her own dismissive family could never have guessed, was that hidden within the ruin on that land was a secret that would not just change her life, but build her a new one from the ground up. Settle in for this one, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Meg Dalloway was born to the scent of ink and paper, the daughter of Elias Dalloway, a cartographer for the Territorial Survey. Her earliest memories were not of a sprawling ranch, but of the precise and patient world of her father's workshop, a small, light-filled room where the world was rendered in fine black lines on clean sheets of vellum. Elias was a man of quiet details. He taught her how to read the contour of a hill from the spacing of lines on a map, how to find true north by the stars, and how to trust the patient, steady needle of a compass. He believed that everything had a place and a reason for being there, and that if you looked closely enough, the land would always tell you its story. When Meg was 6, a fever swept through their small settlement, and it took both her father and mother in the space of a week. She was left with nothing but a trunk of her father's maps and a small, heavy compass he had been making for her 7th birthday. The case was turned brass, warm and solid in her hand, and the needle was tipped with a tiny sliver of turquoise he had found on a survey trip, a fleck of sky to guide her on the earth. She was sent to live with her father's older brother, Silas, a man who measured the world not in lines on a map, but in acres and head of cattle. Silas Dalloway was a hard, pragmatic rancher, and he saw his orphaned niece as another mouth to feed, another pair of hands for the endless work. He gave her a room in a small lined shack a half-mile from the main house, and from the age of 7, she earned her keep. She mended fences, tended the kitchen garden, darned socks, and learned the hard, repetitive labor of a life tied to the land. Her aunt, Clara, was a woman worn thin by the demands of the ranch, and saw Meg not as a child to be nurtured, but as a constant, low-grade burden. The only person who ever showed her a moment of simple, uncomplicated kindness was an old ranch hand named Jedediah, a widower who had worked for Silas for 30 years. He saw the quiet competence in the girl, and in the evenings, he taught her the things a rancher's son might learn. He showed her how to properly set a post, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to use a handsaw without binding the blade, and how to drive a nail straight and true with 3 clean strokes. He never said much, but his patient instruction was a form of care, a recognition of her worth beyond the chores she was assigned. For 13 years, Meg lived in this state of quiet servitude, a ghost in her own family. Her only real connection to her past held in the weight of the brass compass in her pocket. The end of her life at the Dalloway Ranch came not with a storm of anger, but with the dry rustle of paper. On a Tuesday morning in late spring, her Uncle Silas called her from the garden to his office in the main house. It was a room she rarely entered, a place of ledgers and deeds that smelled of leather and stale cigar smoke. He did not ask her to sit. He stood behind his heavy oak desk, a place of absolute authority, and looked at her with the same dispassionate gaze he used when assessing livestock. He informed her that he had sold the northeastern parcel of the ranch, the 160 acres that bordered the old government road. The sale, he explained, included the line shack where she lived. The new owner, a speculator from back east, wanted the land cleared and vacant possession upon closing. Meg stood perfectly still, her hands clasped behind her back, and listened. She knew what this meant. Silas went on, his voice flat and businesslike. His own son, Robert, was to be married in the fall, and his new wife would be taking over the management of the household gardens and kitchens. Meg's duties, he stated without a hint of apology, were no longer required. Her position on the ranch had become redundant. He gestured to a plain manila envelope on the desk. Inside, he explained, was the sum of $87. He had calculated it with care. $50 was the inheritance her father had left her, a small policy he had paid into, which Silas had been holding in trust for her until she came of age. The remaining $37 was what he considered a fair final wage for her years of labor, calculated at a rate that was frankly insulting, but which she had no power to contest. It was a transaction, pure and simple. The final closing of an account. He was not casting out a niece. He was terminating an arrangement that had ceased to be profitable. Meg felt a cold stillness settle over her, a strange and quiet clarity. There would be no begging, no tears. She had watched her uncle for 13 years and understood the futility of appealing to a heart that operated like a ledger. To argue would be to show a weakness he would neither respect nor accommodate. So she simply gave a single sharp nod. She walked forward, took the envelope from the desk, and turned without a word. Her footsteps were silent on the polished floorboards as she left the office, the house, and the life she had always known. She went back to the shack, the place that had been her only home, and began to pack the few things that were truly hers. The dismissal was complete, as quiet and final as the closing of a heavy door. She owned very little. A spare calico dress, a wool blanket Jedediah had given her one winter, a small whetstone, a sturdy knife, and the clothes she was wearing. She packed these into a canvas sack, along with a small portion of dried jerky and a full water skin from the well. The last thing she packed was the compass, its brass case cool and solid against her palm. She did not look back at the main house as she walked away from the ranch at first light the next morning. There was nothing there for her to see. She had no horse, so she traveled on foot, her boots kicking up small puffs of dust from the dry road. She headed east, toward Purgatory Springs, the only town of any size within a 3-day walk. It was a place of false-fronted buildings and thirsty horses, a hub for the ranchers and miners who scratched a living from the unforgiving land. Her only plan was to find the territorial land office and see what sort of existence $87 could purchase. She chose not to follow the main road, instead turning south to walk alongside the abandoned tracks of the old Calico Spur railway line. It was a line that hadn't seen a train in 20 years, its iron rails rusting to the color of the surrounding earth. Jedediah had called it a folly, a line built on a speculator's dream of a silver strike that never materialized. It ran deep into the Sonora Flats, and according to local wisdom, terminated at a collapsed mine shaft and a pile of sun-bleached lumber. But her father had once told her that every line on a map, every road, every track, was a story of intention. "No one lays a rail to nowhere, Meg," he had said, tracing a route with his finger. They were always going somewhere. And so she followed it, the two parallel lines of rust stretching into the shimmering heat haze, a promise of direction in a world that had offered her none. The sun was relentless, the landscape a vast empty canvas of creosote bush and pale, dry earth. The silence was broken only by the crunch of her own footsteps and the distant cry of a hawk circling in the immense blue sky. It was a journey into emptiness, a stripping away of everything she had been, leaving only the steady, determined rhythm of walking. The land office in Purgatory Springs was a cramped, dusty room that smelled of aging paper and indifference. The clerk behind the counter, a man with a stained vest and a perpetually bored expression, barely looked up when she entered. When Meg explained her purpose and laid her $87 on the worn wooden counter, a small, sad pile of bills and coin, the man gave a short, humorless laugh. He gestured vaguely at a large, fly-specked map of the territory pinned to the wall. $87, he said, drawing the words out with mocking slowness. That might get you a burial plot, miss. Not much else. He told her the good parcels, the ones with water or decent grazing, were long gone, bought up by ranchers like her uncle. What was left was desert scrub, alkali flats, and rock. He seemed to enjoy her predicament, the small power he held over her meager hopes. Then, a cruel glint appeared in his eye. He tapped a finger on a remote section of the map, far out in the eastern flats. There is one thing, he said, a smirk playing on his lips. A 5-acre claim out along the old Calico Spur. Got a derelict line shack on it, according to the survey. Been on the books for 10 years. No one's ever wanted it. He named the price for the deed and the filing fees. It came to $86.50. He was offering her a ruin at the edge of nowhere, a piece of land everyone else considered worthless. He expected her to refuse, to walk away defeated. Meg looked at the map. She saw the thin, spidery line of the Calico Spur, the very tracks she had just followed. She saw the small, square outline of the claim, an island of ink in a sea of empty parchment. It was nothing. It was everything. It was a place to stand that belonged only to her, a place from which she could not be ejected. "I'll take it," she said, her voice clear and steady. The clerk's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. He shrugged, pulled the dusty deed from a filing cabinet, and began the paperwork. An hour later, Meg walked out of the office with 50 cents in her pocket and a piece of paper that said she was the owner of Lot 73, Calico Spur Survey. She bought a small bag of flour with her remaining coin and began the long walk back, this time not just as a traveler, but as a landowner heading home. She found the shack 2 days later, just as the sun was setting. It was little more than a skeleton. Built from weathered railroad ties and salvaged planks, it listed to one side as if tired of standing. The roof was a patchwork of rusted tin and bare rafters, gaping open to the sky. The single door hung from one leather hinge, and the window was a jagged, empty square. Inside, the floor was just packed earth, littered with sand and the debris of years of neglect. But it was solid in its bones. The 4 main posts were thick, creosote-soaked timbers, and at one end stood a small fireplace and chimney built of stacked river stone, dark with soot but seemingly intact. It was a wreck, a forgotten piece of the world. But as she stood in the doorway and watched the last light paint the desert in shades of purple and orange, she felt a sense of ownership so profound it was almost dizzying. It was broken, but it was hers to mend. She began the work of reclamation the next morning. Her first task was to make the shack defensible against the elements and the desert creatures. She swept out the years of accumulated sand, dust, and animal leavings with a makeshift broom fashioned from a creosote branch. She used her hatchet to pry the remaining rotten planks from the roof, letting the full force of the desert sun pour in, sterilizing the small space. The structure was small, no more than 12 feet by 10, But the stone hearth at the eastern end gave it a sense of permanence, an anchor against the vast emptiness outside. It was the most solid thing in the place, and she decided to clean it first, to make one corner of the ruin truly clean. The firebox was choked with old ash, hardened by time and moisture into a solid gray mass. She chipped away at it with the blade of her hatchet, scraping down to the stone beneath. As she worked her way to the back, clearing the soot and debris, she noticed something odd about the hearthstone itself, the single flat slab of sandstone that formed the floor of the fireplace. Unlike the surrounding stones, which were set in a crude clay mortar, this one seemed to sit loosely in its bed of sand. Curious, she wedged the tip of her knife into the seam and wiggled it. The stone shifted slightly. Her heart gave a small, quiet thump. Using her hatchet as a lever, she worked its blade into the gap and pressed down on the handle. With a grating sound of stone on grit, the heavy slab lifted. Beneath it lay a hollow space, a small, neatly excavated cavity in the earth, and nestled inside was a rectangular tin box, about the size of a loaf of bread, tightly wrapped in a sheath of waxed canvas to protect it from moisture. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted it out. It was heavy for its size. She unwrapped the canvas, its surface stiff and cool, and worked open the simple clasp on the tin. The contents were packed with an extraordinary neatness. On top lay a small carved wooden bird, a desert finch perhaps, its simple lines worn smooth and dark from years of handling. Beneath it was a folded letter, the paper yellowed with age but the ink still clear and dark. And under the letter, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth and tied with twine, was a small, dense bundle. She untied the twine and unfolded the cloth. Inside was a tidy stack of $20 gold pieces, gleaming softly in the sunlight, alongside a sheaf of crisp, territorial banknotes. She counted it slowly, her breath held tight in her chest. There were over $400 here. A fortune. More money than she had ever seen in her life. It was enough to build a new roof, to buy real tools, to purchase a mule and a wagon. It was the foundation for a life. She set the money aside, her mind reeling, and picked up the letter. The handwriting was precise and elegant, the script of a person who valued clarity. She unfolded the brittle paper and began to read. To the person who finds this place, my name is Esther Vargas. I lived in this shack for 17 years, from 1868 until 1885. My husband Mateo was a signalman for the railroad before an accident took him. This was his post, and after he was gone, it became my home. I am leaving this box here because I have no one else to give it to. My only son, David, went east to find work 6 years ago. I have not had a letter from him in 4. I fear he is not coming back. This money is what I saved over the years, from selling eggs and mended clothes to the folks who live further down this line. It was meant for him, to help him build a life. Now I leave it for you. I do not know who you are, or what circumstances brought you to this forgotten place, but I pray this money serves as a foundation. Use it to build something that will last, something that the wind cannot blow away. There is good stone in the creek bed a mile south, and the clay by the wash makes a fine mortar. Be careful of the summer storms. They come up fast from the south. If you need help or supplies you cannot buy in town, follow these tracks east for another 5 miles. They will lead you into a narrow canyon. There you will find a settlement called Calico Wash. It is not on any map. The people there are good people. They chose to be forgotten by the outside world. Tell them Esther sent you. They will understand. I am an old woman now, and I am going to live with my sister in Tucson. I do not think I will see this desert again. I hope you find your way. I hope you find a home." Esther Vargas Meg read the letter 3 times, the simple, powerful words sinking into her soul. A stranger, a woman she would never meet, had reached across the years and given her not just money, but a map and a blessing. She held the small wooden finch in her palm, its surface a testament to another person's patience and hope, and felt a profound connection to this woman who had also known loss and loneliness. With Esther's words echoing in her mind, Meg felt a new resolve harden within her. She was no longer just surviving, she was building. The next day, she walked the long miles back to Purgatory Springs, but this time she walked with purpose. She bypassed the land office and the clerk who had mocked her. Instead, she went to the mercantile, her list, composed in her head during the long walk, ready. She bought a good cross-cut saw, a heavy claw hammer, a brace and bit, and boxes of nails in 3 sizes. She bought milled pine boards for a proper floor and new roof decking, and rolls of tar paper for waterproofing. She purchased a small, sturdy cast-iron stove, sacks of flour, beans, and salt, and a new kerosene lamp. Her purchases were methodical, practical, and she paid for them in cash, the gold coins from Esther's box making a solid, satisfying clink on the counter. The store owner, who had previously ignored her, was now all deference and respect. The final problem was transport. Her supplies formed a small mountain on the mercantile's loading dock. She needed a wagon and a team. The store owner recommended a man named Abel Thornton, an old freighter who made a living hauling goods to the outlying ranches and mining camps. She found him mending a harness in the town's livery stable. He was a man in his 60s, with a face as weathered as old leather and hands that were thick and calloused from a lifetime of handling reins and rope. He listened to her request without expression, his gaze sharp and assessing. He looked at her slight frame, her worn dress, and the pile of supplies, and a skeptical frown creased his forehead. "That's a lot of lumber for a girl on her own," he said, his voice a low rumble. "And the calico spur is a rough track." Meg met his gaze directly. "I'm a hard worker, Mr. Thornton," she said simply. "And the shack is mine. I intend to fix it." She offered him a fair price for the hauling, a price that showed she understood the value of his time and the labor of his mules. Something in her quiet determination seemed to win him over. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust and nodded slowly. "Be ready at sunup," he said. The next morning, as the sky turned from gray to pale rose, Abel Thornton's wagon, loaded with her future, rumbled out of Purgatory Springs, heading east along the forgotten tracks. The journey with Abel was slow and quiet. He was not a man for idle chatter, but as they traveled, he watched her. He saw how she studied the land, how she anticipated the rough patches in the trail, and how she handled herself with a competence that belied her age. When they arrived at the derelict shack, he helped her unload the heavy timbers and the cast-iron stove, his movements economical and strong. Before he left, he stood for a moment, looking at the roof and then at her. "You'll want to set your main roof beam first," he advised, pointing with his chin. "Use the chimney stack as your anchor point. It's the solidest thing you've got." It was a small piece of advice, a gift of his experience, and for Meg, it felt like a vote of confidence. She thanked him, and he simply touched the brim of his hat and turned his team back toward town. Alone again, surrounded by the raw materials of a new life, Meg began the real work. She laid the floorboards first, creating a clean, level surface to work from. She learned the heft of the saw, the rhythm of the hammer, the satisfying bite of a sharp drill bit into seasoned pine. She followed Abel's advice, securing the main roof beam to the stone chimney, and from there, she built the rafters, one by one. Her days fell into a simple, powerful pattern. Work from sunup to sundown, eat a simple meal of beans and bread, and fall into an exhausted, dreamless sleep on her blanket under the stars. The shack slowly transformed under her hands, its skeleton being fleshed out with new wood and purpose. A week into her work, with the roof framed but not yet covered, she decided to follow the second part of Esther's instructions. Leaving her camp secure, she packed a skin of water and some jerky and started walking east along the tracks, deeper into the desert. The landscape grew wilder, the rails more and more obscured by scrub and sand. After walking for what she estimated was 5 miles, just as the letter had said, the flat terrain gave way to a series of low, rocky mesas. The railway line curved sharply and disappeared into a narrow cut between 2 towering walls of red rock. It felt like a hidden doorway into the earth. She followed the tracks into the canyon, the air growing cooler in the shade of the rock walls. After another quarter-mile, the canyon opened into a small, circular valley, a hidden oasis of impossible green in the middle of the desert. A small, clear creek ran through it, lined with cottonwood trees. And nestled along the creek was a settlement. It was not a town of false fronts and dusty streets, but a cluster of a dozen small, sturdy homes built of adobe and riverstone, each with a flourishing garden. Smoke curled from several chimneys, and she could hear the distant sound of a blacksmith's hammer and the bleating of goats. This was Calico Wash. Her arrival did not go unnoticed. A man working in a nearby garden straightened up and watched her approach, his expression wary. Soon, others emerged from their homes, their faces showing not welcome, but a deep, ingrained suspicion of outsiders. They were a people who had chosen to be invisible, and she was an intruder. An older woman with long gray braids and a face mapped with wrinkles stepped forward. She seemed to be a figure of authority. "What is your business here?" she asked, her voice firm but not unkind. Meg stood her ground, her canvas sack held loosely in one hand. She did not try to explain everything at once. She simply said, "My name is Meg Dalloway. I've taken ownership of the old signalman's shack down the line. I was cleaning the hearth and found a letter from a woman named Esther Vargas. She told me I might find this place." At the mention of Esther's name, a ripple of murmuring went through the small crowd. The old woman's stern expression softened into something more complex, recognition and a hint of sadness. "I am Maria," she said. "I remember Esther. She was a good woman, quiet. She traded with us for many years after her husband died." Maria's acceptance was a key turning a lock. The tension in the air eased. She invited Meg to sit and share a cup of water, and Meg told her story, not the part about the money, but about her uncle, the purchase of the land, and her work rebuilding the shack. The people of Calico Wash listened, their initial suspicion replaced by a quiet, watchful respect. They understood what it was to be cast out, and to have to build a life from what others had discarded. They were the descendants of families who had been swindled out of their mining claims 40 years prior by a powerful syndicate. Rather than scatter, they had retreated to this hidden valley, a place their grandfathers had known of, and had built a new, self-sufficient world for themselves, erasing their own map from the territory. Meg did not ask for help, but it was offered in small, practical ways. A man named Ben Carter, the town's blacksmith, saw the hatchet tucked into her belt. "Blade's got a nick in it," he observed. He took it to his forge and returned it an hour later with a perfectly honed, razor-sharp edge. Maria gave her a basket of fresh vegetables and a half-dozen eggs. "A body can't live on flour and beans alone," she said. Over the next few months, Meg became a bridge between Calico Wash and the outside world. With Esther's money, she could buy things in Purgatory Springs that the settlement needed: sacks of salt, sugar, bolts of cloth, and steel for Ben's forge. She would have Abel Thornton haul the goods to her shack, and from there, she or one of the men from the wash would transport them the rest of the way. In return, they shared their own resources with her. They taught her which desert plants were edible, how to track the seasonal flow of the creek, and how to mix the local clay into a durable adobe plaster. She finished her shack, plastering the inside walls until they were smooth and pale, and building a proper door that shut tight against the wind. Her home was no longer a ruin. It was a small, warm, functional space, filled with the smell of curing wood and the faint scent of the iron stove. The people of Calico Wash knew her name. They waved when she approached. She was no longer an outsider. She was the girl from Esther's shack, a quiet, respected part of their hidden world. Dusk settled over the desert, turning the vast sky into a canvas of deep violet and soft, lingering gold. Inside the small cabin, a warm light flickered from the kerosene lamp on the table, pushing back the shadows. The cast-iron stove radiated a gentle, steady heat, a welcome comfort against the cooling night air. Meg sat at the small, sturdy table she had built herself from the leftover pine boards, her hands wrapped around a warm tin cup of herbal tea. The space was hers, every nail and every plank a testament to her own labor. The floor was swept clean, the wool blanket was folded neatly on her cot, and through the small, square window, she could see the first stars beginning to appear. On the table in front of her, two small objects sat side by side in the lamplight. One was her father's compass, its brass case gleaming, the turquoise-tipped needle quivering ever so slightly, faithfully pointing north. The other was the small wooden finch, left by Esther Vargas, its dark wood worn to a soft, smooth patina. She looked at them, these two small legacies from two people who had cared for a future they would never see. Her father had given her the tools to navigate the world, the ability to read the land, to trust her own direction, to understand that every line led somewhere. He had given her a way of seeing. Esther, a complete stranger bound to her only by the shared ownership of a forgotten piece of land, had given her the means to build a world. She had left a foundation of both capital and community, a map to a hidden harbor, and the resources to drop anchor there. Meg thought of her Uncle Silas, who had seen her only as a line item in a ledger, a cost to be managed and eventually eliminated. He had cast her out with what he considered a paltry, final payment, never imagining that she could build a life from it. He saw only worthless land and a redundant girl. He had never learned his brother's lesson. To look closer, to see the story the land was telling. The rusted tracks of the Calico Spur had not led to nowhere. They had led here, to this solid little house, to the warmth of this stove, to the quiet friendship of the people in the hidden wash. They had led her home. Meg Dalloway was 19 when she was dismissed with $87 to her name. She spent nearly all of it on a derelict shack on a railway line to nowhere. It was the best money she ever spent. We hope this story found you well tonight. If it moved you, consider sharing it with someone who might appreciate a story of quiet resilience. And for a moment of reflection, We leave you with this question. What forgotten places have you known in your own life? And what hidden value did they hold, just waiting for someone to look a little closer? Thank you for being here with us.